Good morning. Today we're going to be looking at creating the art panel. This is the art panel is what we're going to be using to actually do some art, creating some nice abstract modern art using shapes inside Java. And our art panel is our main panel that's going to be doing the work for that. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that. As you can see right now, we have a huge stack of imports we're using on this. I'm specifically not using the .asterisk, so I actually show you what we're working with. And so on the java.abt, this is the things that are new that we haven't been working with. Now we've used color before. Dimension we've used a little bit, but again, we're going to use that to actually specify the size of some structures. The grid layout is new. Polygon and rectangle we saw in, in the other video about how to create shapes. And then of course our java.abt.event.action listener and event. And that's how we handle buttons. No big deal. We also have the java.abt.geom.ellipse2d, the other shape we're working with. And then we're also going to be using a hash table as part of the GUI right here, something we haven't done before. At the end, java.x.swing.asterisk, we have so many things from Swing in there. I'm just going to do a mass import for that. And then one of the things we're using from Swing is the slider, which requires its own special event. And just like we have up here in abt.event.action event, I can't just .asterisk it right here because it's in a sub package, in this case the event sub package. And so I have to explicitly import the change event and change listener for use on the slider scale. And then of course we have a reference to our controller that we can use to actually handle the actual information passing using our model view controller approach. So let's scroll down, let's take a look at the actual data member section for the class. And so in our data member section right here, of course we have our public class ArtPanel extends JPanel because our JPanel is what we're using for this. We have 4 constants we're going to be using. And the 4 constants we're going to be using so we can actually keep track of some information and make it so that we have it set once, and if we decide to change our actual implementation, we don't have to change it once because it'll handle all the different spots right there. And so we have our private because it's only available internally. It's final to identify that it is a constant and it's of type int. And then we're using the standard approach by naming the standard naming convention of constants where it's all caps separated by underscores or underbars. And so minimum edge is 5 because I don't want to use smaller sizes for my polygons, and my max edge is going to be 20 because at that point it's going to be kind of hard to tell what we're looking at. Minimum scale starting at 20, our max scale going up to 100, and that's where we're going to see how big or small our different shapes are going to be created. Of course, we have our data member for our art controller. We're using the boring name again of app. And then we have our GUI components. In our GUI component, we start off, of course, with our spring layout. This is a traditional way of laying out our information, so we can make things resize and have some nice bounds between things that we've been using inside Spring or Swing the entire year. We have our shape canvas, which is a subclass we'll be looking at here again in just a bit. And it's a subclass of JPanel as well, but it's a special thing. Let's save that for another video. We have 2 special panels though, our button panel or slider panel. We're doing something a little bit different right here. We're going to hold our buttons and sliders in a single container so we can actually use that and make a little bit more organized structure for that. And then we have our 2 sliders, our scale slider and edge slider, and of course all of our buttons, triangles, rectangles, ellipses, polygons, clear, save, and color. So we've got some buttons to handle. And then I've got 2 private variables, edge count and current scale, that are going to be used to store the value that we're using the sliders, because the sliders themselves, to actually access them, it would be a little bit problematic every time we wanted to get the value. So we're going to use a variable to store that right there. So we've got our data member section right there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the constructor. And our constructor, of course, because this is a subclass, we always start with the keyword super. We want to call the super constructor for JPanel, so it handles any of the things that need to be handled by that superclass. Again, we have our constructor takes a parameter of app, so we can use that to do our message passing that we use inside our message passing we do inside the our app itself using model view controller, because we don't want to have our view actually have to do work with the model, or have the view have information doesn't need to worry about, and so that's what we're using that for. We then set this.app equals app because that's how we assign the parameter to it. We set our app layout to be new spring layout. Again, that same basic thing we've done all year long, no big deal. We then use our we then are going to use our constants. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to initialize our data members of edge count and scale to be the minimum scale and minimum edge, because that way they have a value. Because again, we always want to explicitly initialize our data members. We don't want some value of 0 90% of the time. We want a value that we actually want in control. And that's why I'm using minimum scale, minimum edge to assign it to our data members right there. Now we really use our constants right here for our scale slider and our edge slider, because when we create a J slider, we need to know what it's sliding across. And so that's where we pass it the minimum scale, maximum scale for the scale slider, and minimum edge and maximum edge for those right there. So we can actually say, oh, it's going from, in this case, 5 to 20 or 20 to 100. We could, if we change them right there, it automatically changes it throughout this. We can use that and it'll do all the math from that based on that as needed. We're going to create our canvas. Our canvas again is that one we're going to be drawing on. We'll see that in another video. And that takes, of course, it's a new shape canvas, and it takes a reference to app because it uses that to handle some information as well. Again, using that model view controller parameter structure. Our slider panel is a new J panel. Nothing on the constructor there because it's just going to be right there. However, our button panel is a little bit different. Our button panels constructor for JPanel takes a new grid layout, passing it 0, 1. And what that does is the new grid layout 0, 1 parameter the new grid layout with a parameter value of 0, 1 says, I don't know how many rows I'm going to have inside this, but I only want one column. And the amazing thing about the grid layout 0, 1 says, what that does is it handles automatically resizing and fitting all of the components we're going to throw inside that grid layout. It really saves some time. It makes it look nice and pretty. And we'll see that in just a bit. The J buttons, yeah, they go in really easy. So I'm being really boring. Add triangle, add rectangle, add ellipse. Wow, really boring stuff. And then, of course, we end our constructor with a call to our helper methods. Now, our traditional helper methods of setup panel, setup layout, and setup listeners are all there already, but we have a new one right here, setupSliders. setupSliders is there because just like when we're dealing with a scroll pane in Java, or dealing with something that has a container type tool, sliders have a little bit more work for it, and because they have some more work than just say, for example, a J button, where all I have to do is just right there, the J slider, we're going to give it a setup method to help along with that. And so that's what we're going to go look at next. So our setupSliders, we're going to go down, take a look at it, and this is where we use the hash table. Now again, a hash table is the dictionary style structure in Java where it has a key value pair that matches up with that. And so the hash table is what we use to actually attach the labels to the sliders themselves. And so it's always going to be an integer as the first parameter and a JLabel as the second parameter of that hash table of type. And just really boring, we use the equals new hash table integer JLabel parens, and we're making 2 of them. I could do just one and then just, clear and add stuff back in, but because of the fact that I might want to change this, I don't want to worry about that, so I make just 2 separate local variables that exist only inside the method right here, and then we're going to use that. Now we're going to do something also new right here. We're going to use the ability to do HTML formatting. Now, one of the things that's really cool about using Swing is that we can dump straight into the Swing itself. We can put in HTML so we can have some formatting that is a little bit more advanced than we would simply just get by using just plain straight text or strings in Java. Now, if we wanted to, we could actually go ahead and attach a cascading style sheet or CSS file to this and do some really pretty fancy formatting. That's not what we're worried about right now. What I'm really doing right here is making it so that small shape are on 2 separate lines, because it really looks a lot nicer for this the slider to have them so it's like, oh, here's small shape, and it looks a little bit cleaner on the actual slider. And so I'm using that. I'm attaching at a minimum scale for the bottom of that, maximum scale plus minimum scale divided by 2, so getting that value divided by 2, so it gets about towards the middle of that. A new JLabel passing it medium shape, weird. And then again at maximum scale, large shape, wow. And then with my edge labels, I'm doing the same approach, but instead of this, I'm just doing edge as a minimum edge and edge as a maximum edge. Okay, no big deal. However, we have some more information we have to set up with that. If that's all it was, we could just throw it in the constructor too. But then we have the fact we have to actually attach that label table, and that we use with the label table method, set label table, whoa, yeah. And then we're gonna set the orientation. Now, with orientation of a slider, we can either have a slider be vertical or horizontal. Now, for the purposes that we're working today, we're going to use a vertical orientation. However, you can make your sliders be either one or combined with them, have like some vertical, some horizontal. But for the design purposes of using this, we're going to have both of them be vertical. I want our sliders to snap to ticks. Now, with a J slider inside Java, they always return an int value. However, I don't want to have some confusion by the user as to what possible int value is going to be there, so I'm specifically using the snap to ticks on that so we know exactly where it is on that. And we're going to set the major tick spacing to be 10, and set paint ticks to be true, and set paint labels to be true. So you can say, oh, here they are every 10. You can get a good idea of what's going to be going along with that. Same thing with our edge labels. We're going to set orientation also vertical. Snap to ticks is also true. Major tick spacing 3, and minor tick spacing at 1. Oh, so it's a little bit different. So I'll have the big ticks and the little ticks. Okay, and again, paint labels to be true. No worries there. Our setup panel is where we also see something a little bit different. So what we have right here in setup panel, we're doing something a bit different. We start off, of course, with set layout because our layout manager has to be attached. And again, we're using a spring layout, which allows us to scale this to make it fit, look nice and pretty. I'm going to do set background of color.dark gray because, hey, I'm dark. I like it. It's all good. Set preferred size. Now, this is something we haven't done before. The set preferred size passing a new dimension of 1024 by 768 means that when I go over to my window builder screen, I can actually see how my thing is going to kind of look instead of just trying to fit in this little tiny square, which doesn't really work. I get like, oh, I want this to look kind of like this. And so that gives me the ability to actually play with window builder and see how it's going to look on screen, what I want to have it do. And then I add my canvas. Again, my canvas is that shape drawing thing we'll be using. And I just add it as a panel just like that because this is just a J panel. I can just put it right in. Now, here's where it's also new. I have my button panel that set preferred size and new dimension 200 by 450. So I have that button panel, which is just a J panel that I'm going to throw my buttons in. And I said, oh, I don't know how many rows I'm going to have, but I'm going to have one single column. And I want that to be 200 pixels wide and 450 pixels tall. And I'm going to throw all these in there. And what this really does is it says, okay, I'm going to put all of them in there, and I'm going to make it so they automatically fit. They're all the same width, they're all the same height, it looks really nice. Oh, cool. Same thing with my slider panel. But because I did not put that one into a grid layout, I'm just going to use the flow layout by default because that's the default layout of everything. So just go plop, 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 plop. And right now there's only two, so it just goes plop, plop. And that makes it work really nice. And I added those two sliders in. And then because I added the slider, scale slider and the edge slider to the slider panel, I only add the slider panel to the panel itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now that I've called setup panel, I can actually see how this is going to be impacted inside my layout. So I'm going to take a look at it over here inside my ArtPanel screen in Window Builder. And again, over here in Window Builder, you can see that I have my GUI layout. So it actually looks like, oh, here's my big, huge thing. I can see how it's impacted. I can scroll over here to the left or the right, excuse me, a bit over here, and I can see, oh, I've got this stuff right here, and I can see my sliders that are in there. You can see that it automatically adds all the buttons inside that. And I only have inside my panel, I have my canvas, my button panel, and my slider panel. Now, because of the fact that I'm using these panels in there, I don't want to try and drag on these and move them around, because when I do, I tend to only move part of things, and I don't want to do that. Ew, yuck. Yeah, so let's go take a see what happened on that. And we look at that, we look at the code, and oh yeah, look, I have some new changing stuff. Ew, yuck. Don't want that there. So let's go back to our J panel right here. We don't want to drag those around. And so when I use this container type objects, just like we did when we used the content pane, excuse me, just like we did when we used the scroll pane, when we want to actually move these around, we want to select the component here in the component list. And then down here in the constraints section under the properties, I can specify the offsets that I want to do and who I want to offset them from. And so that way I only have to worry about the actual panel itself and I can move them. And this way I can have some nice consistency and it's really nice. So what I did is I start off with my first one, my canvas, and I said, oh, I want this to be 50 away from the top of the panel and 50 away from the west edge of the panel on the west side. Oh, nice. Looks really pretty. And then because it's not quite the same of a distance between these because they're a little bit different, I didn't set it 50 away from that, but I did want to have a nice differentiation. So I set that one to be 40 away. So the panel is 40 away from the east edge of the canvas, and its height is set to be 0 at the canvas. And then the other panel, oh, I want that one to be close to it, so I'm going to only set that to be 20 away from its west edge is 20 away from the east edge, and it's also going to be 0 aligned with it as well. So that way they all stay nice and aligned. And so that way I can have this all ready to go. So now my setup layout comes out, and it's actually kind of simple this time compared to some of my other setup layouts. So let's take a look at the code right there again. And so if we look at my setup layout, instead of having a giant pile of app-layout.putConstraints where I have every single button stuff constrained on there, all I have are the constraints for my canvas, my button panel, and my slider panel. And so it really makes it really easy to do that. So when I want to do a more complex layout, using other panels to hold that saves us a lot of time. Now, we have our coin flip method. We've already seen that in our create polygon, create rectangle, and our create ellipse methods. These are the ones that we're going to use to actually do stuff. But those are create shapes, so you can watch the create shapes video if you want to see some information on those. But again, this is the art panel itself. We want to take a look at how we're going to be doing this with there. And so the next thing we have, of course, is our setup listeners. And again, our setup listeners is where we're going to handle doing everything we do inside the... And so we have... Now, we've looked at the actual setup layout and how that does. We have some other methods, of course, that belong to the class. We have coin flip, create polygon, create rectangle, and create ellipse. Now, these methods we see in use inside our create shapes video. You can take a look at that later. But what we really want to look at, again, because we're talking about the panel right here, is how we're going to use setup listeners. And we're doing a couple new things with this. So let's go ahead and expand that out. And in the expanded out version, you can see that we have listeners, of course, for all of our buttons and for our sliders. So let's do the new thing first of looking at our sliders, because they're actually a little bit special. And so our sliders are a bit different. So on our buttons, we normally just do an add action listener. With a slider, we use a new change listener. And I do set changed, or state changed, excuse me. And I have to make a test because I have to see, am I adjusting it? Because if I'm not adjusting it, I don't know what's actually allowed. So I want to actually get the value, not when someone's dragging it, but actually get the value that's currently selected. So I have to do a not on the test. So if not.getValue is adjusting, so it's not actually being moved, at that point, then I can say, oh, edge slider to get value, I'm going to assign that into my variable current edge count. I'm going to do the exact same thing on scale slider right here, where I can actually set current scale equal to scale slider's value when it's not being moved. That way, when I create my shapes for my edge and my scale, I have a stable value I can use. Pretty nifty. Okay. Now, rectangle, triangle, and ellipse, let's take a look at those. Now, in my rectangle method, I have, of course, I have my create rectangle, which creates some rectangle. I'm using a really boring name of rectangle for it. and then I call canvas.addShape rectangle. And then I have polygon triangle equals create polygon, passing it 3 because it's a triangle, of course. Then I have canvas.addShape triangle. Whoa, whoa, whoa. When I'm passing a method, or excuse me, when I have a method, it takes one parameter. And this is the addShape method. I'm just like, oh, one parameter with a rectangle or triangle. I'm going to use polymorphism to do this. So I can have this so it'll take any shape. And I'll handle that inside my canvas class, because that allows me to, so I can do polymorphism. I don't have to do extra work. This is a great way of saving work by using polymorphism, because a rectangle, a polygon, and an ellipse all implement the shape interface. And so because they all are shapes, I can use the same method to call all of them. So addShape, and guess what for polygon? And ellipse. That's right. addShape again, and addShape again. So no big deal, we can add all the shapes right in. However, notice that we have something a little bit different. There are no expando sections right here for my clear, color, or save buttons. Whoa, what's different? We're going to use the magic power of the Java 8 lambda syntax. What? Yes, Java 8 and above has this amazingly cool thing where I can shortcut some code and I can implement methods as a passable instance. In this case, what I'm doing, instead of calling the public void action performed action event click, I can just say click is directed to canvas.clear. So I can take the action event, if I hover over this, oh, click is an action event. I'm basically taking all this work right here of these lines all the way up to this and into that. So when I click it, I call that. So the lambda listener is amazing. It's a great way to shortcut stuff. So I can actually just do directed right in this. I can even do one like this right here. I can turn this one into a lambda as well. What I would have to do to make this one be a lambda to make my ellipse button work is I do the same approach. Instead of having a new action listener, I would take this right here and I would delete all of that. And I would say click, arrow, and as you can see, really quick and simple. So I can do this the same exact way. I like myself when I'm doing, however, when I have multi-line statements inside my action performed, I really prefer not to use the lambda approach, because when I'm doing lots of things at once, I like to actually, oh, here's this, then this, and this, and so I don't want to worry about having some anonymous information attached to it. But so when it's just a quick little simple one-liner like this, oh, canvas.clear, I can call that directly with lambda. And that's one of the amazing features of using Java 8, is we can actually do stuff like this. Now you can also do even more amazing things with this by using streams, which we saw in other videos, where you can actually use Java 8 to do some cool sorting and filtering and building data information from that. But for right now, this is a great way we can call methods and make our listeners be a little bit more simple for doing some cool things. So just a quick review. We used inside this, we used some new imports. We used the hash table structure. We learned how to work this. A quick review of the class for our ArtPanel class. We used the hash table, doing something a little bit new. We have a whole bunch of stuff we're using from java.awt and java.swing that we haven't used before. In our constructor data member section, of course, we have that new structure of a JSlider, something we haven't used before. Again, how to use a constant inside Java. And then in our constructor, we had the new thing where we're passing a grid layout, because a grid layout allows us to have an unspecified number of rows or columns. If I swapped it the other way, I'd have an unknown number of columns all in one row. So you can do some really cool stuff that way, but for what we're doing, it wouldn't work. And then we did a little new thing using the panel so I could contain all my buttons, and I did that differently inside my setupPanel method, where I added buttons to the panel and then just added the panel. And then in my setupSliders, I used the new feature of doing HTML inside my string, so I can actually have right here a different approach. And so if we take a look at that, I'll run my program right here. You can see how I have the large shape wrap around, so I use the BR tag to do that line wrap right there. And I have the automatic line matching, so it only goes to the ticks. Same thing right here, I can go between any little ticks or the big ticks, between 3 to 20, excuse me, from 5 to 20. I can have my add triangle, draws triangles. Those are all triangle shapes, some of them are kind of small. Let's make this be a bit bigger. Add triangle. And so the triangles only draw. Take my rectangles only fill. Add my ellipses. I can have some circles, I have some ovals, pretty fantastic there. Add polygons. Now my polygons I have them set to only draw because it's kind of messy. Let's take a look and let's clear this. And my clear button wipes it clean. So I add my polygon. My polygon draws in order of whichever those points are, so you get some really interesting and odd shapes. And if I make that be medium, add some more polygons, we get some really interesting shapes. Oh, cool, star, nice. Clear that again. I can also do this to make some saving images. So let's throw some stuff on there, change its color, and I can save the image, and I have now the ability to save my image. We'll take a look at that later. But that's how we can have this happen. Oh, that's it. Polygon. Ooh, pretty polygons. Yas.